without culture, without the Geist, is it possible to contribute to advanced science? Okay, and I think the answer is no. I think we're stuck where we are because we've abandoned culture, we've abandoned Geist. All right, so now let's look at the legacy of Kant, okay? So what's amazing is the more science progresses, the more Kant is proving right. So neuroscience is telling us today that we hallucinate the reality, all right? And there are lots of experiments that prove this. So let's go over some really quick examples. We see a triangle, right? Guess what, guys? It doesn't exist, okay? It's just part of our imagination. These lines exist, the triangle doesn't exist. But the first thing we see is this triangle that does not exist. All right? This thing moves, okay? But we know it doesn't really move, okay? So our mind is playing tricks on us. We see this as slanted, okay? When we actually take them side by side together, you'll see them as parallel. Okay? Another mind trick that's being played. Which is bigger? Well, they're the same. But because of the circles, we think this is bigger than that, okay? Another mind trick that's being played on us. A and B are different colors, right? It's obvious they're different colors, right? But actually, they're the same color, okay? Another mind trick that's being played. So, neuroscientists have done a lot of experiments, and they've proven to us that we constantly participate in reality. We hallucinate reality, which is what Kant originally proposed. All right, let's move on to artificial intelligence. Okay, artificial intelligence shows us the limits of the blank slate theory. Okay, so let's imagine you actually had a blank slate in your minds. Well, that would be extremely problematic, and we know because of how artificial intelligence works. All right, let's look at supervised learning. So when we talk about artificial intelligence, it doesn't actually exist. What exists is the idea of supervised learning. And the idea is this. We're trying to teach a machine, an algorithm, to recognize a picture. Okay, so what we do is this. We feed a lot of training data into the algorithm. And we're talking like millions and millions of pictures. And then we label this data so that the machine is able to, using its own analysis, figure out the differences, okay? It basically turns every picture into a mathematical concept. And then if you train it well enough, then it's able to differentiate between a triangle and a circle. Okay, that's the idea of machine learning. Okay, same concept here, okay? You have to feed it millions of pictures, and you have to label these different pictures, and then the machine will mathematically be able to figure out which is which, okay? How the machine does that, we're not really concerned about, but we need to train the machine. And the problem with this is it's very expensive, it's very time consuming. All right, now let's compare this with how a human does it, right? A human, if I just give you a picture of a sheep, you're able to know what a sheep is. And why does that happen? Okay, so a machine is able to tell you this is sheep, okay? But what a machine is not able to tell you is this sheep real or fake? Right? Is this a real or fake sheep? Well, we think it's fake, right? But what the machine says, we don't know. And the machine is correct. Real, fake are categories of the mind, right? How do we know this is a fake sheep and not a real sheep? Do you understand? So the machine is saying, if I don't know anything, if I have no a priori synthetic knowledge, then I cannot differentiate between fake and real. But a child, anyone can know this is a fake sheep, because obviously we have categories in our minds, okay? A machine could not tell you what this is. Why? Because this has become a schema, a concept. But any child can tell you this is a sheep, okay? And again, so this is artificial intelligence is showing us that Kant was correct. All right. As I mentioned, Kant inspired Einstein to dream up the theory of relativity. All right. So Einstein read Kant when he was 16. It had a huge influence on Einstein. Space-time curvature is influenced by it, but also the theory of relativity. Okay. And the theory of relativity, it's fairly straightforward. Let's just say that I'm sitting on a platform, a train platform, and you guys are across from me, okay? Now, we're not moving, right? We know we're not moving. But let's just say that for whatever reason, simultaneously, both platforms are moving at the same speed, okay? From our perspective, we're still not moving. And that's the idea of relativity, where the laws of physics are relative to where we are at the moment. Okay? And this, again, is influenced by Kant. What's really fun is to think about quantum mechanics. Okay? So quantum mechanics confirms things in themselves, phenomena, are not knowable to us. So this is a major argument between Kant and Hegel. Okay? And so quantum mechanics. So we looked at light, and we want to know what the essence of light is. What are photons? And we discovered something really problematic, which is we discovered that photons are both wave-like and particle-like. They're both wave movement and particle, something static. And what's even more problematic is what we discovered is you're not able to figure out the state of the light, if it's a wave or a particle, until you actually measure it. So in other words, before you measure light, before you measure particles, they are simultaneously occupying many different possibilities, something we call a superposition, okay? And this idea of wave function. A wave function is all the probabilities of its position in space. When you measure it, it collapses into one data point, okay? Does that make sense? All right. So, in school we teach you the Bohr model of the atom, but in really it's a cloud, meaning we don't know where the electrons are at a certain state. We can only know the probability of where it could be, okay? And so that's a problem here. All right, so this idea of quantum mechanics, Einstein hated this theory. He thought this was disgusting. There's too much randomness. It's ugly. He hated it, okay? He thought that God, as an architect, had an elegant mind. And we come up with these theories like quantum mechanics, which actually makes absolutely no sense. You're insulting God. So to disprove quantum mechanics, Einstein wrote a paper on something called quantum entanglement. And the idea is this, okay, things cannot be measured. We cannot know the state of things, of atoms, until they're measured, right? Well, in quantum mechanics, things also exist in opposition towards each other. Okay, so maybe two atoms are aligned together, and their two states are mirror images of each other. So what you can do is this: if you split these two and you send them off in different corners of the universe, according to quantum mechanics, the moment you measure the first atom, the second atom must also reveal itself, even though you have not measured it, and it also has to be simultaneous, even though these two atoms could possibly at different ends of the universe. Okay, quantum entanglement, and Einstein says, this can't possibly be true. This is a stupid idea. And this proves quantum mechanics doesn't work. The problem is this. The problem is we've done experiments to prove quantum entanglement actually does work. And this is true. Okay? Not only that, but quantum mechanics has proven itself to be the most successful theory in physics of all time, because it's given rise to the transistor. Okay? The idea of the transistor is, if you can understand electrons, then you can manipulate electrons in a way that allows you to manipulate it, which allows you to make calculations on it, okay? So the transition has given rise to the computer, which has given rise to the internet, okay? Basically create the world that we live in today. So without quantum mechanics, we cannot have the world we live in today. Okay, so, but again, even though we know quantum mechanics to be true, we don't know why it's true. Okay, there are lots of mysteries in quantum mechanics. One of the biggest problems in quantum mechanics is something called Schrodinger's cat. So Schrodinger created a thought experiment to show you how problematic quantum mechanics is. Let's just say that you have a cat inside a box, and there's radioactive material inside this box, okay? And you don't know, you can never know if this cat is dead or alive. So, the only thing you can say is, it is both dead and alive, which again is problematic. But that's not it. It's even more problematic, because another physicist, Wigner, said, okay, let's do another thought experiment. Let's just say, okay, I'm a scientist, I open the box. Then I know the state of the cat now, right? I didn't know it before, but once I open the box, I can see if the cat is alive or dead. Now I know. But let's just say that there's a friend in my laboratory who is observing me, okay? And he has not himself opened the box. So when I open the box and I find the cat is dead, what happens to him? Okay? Well, there are different possibilities. The first possibility is he now knows. Okay, so reality has changed for him once he has this information. The other possibility is he doesn't know, but he thinks he knows. Okay? So this shows you how problematic quantum mechanics is. And you can keep on going like this to the nth degree. Okay? In other words, the question that they're trying to deal with, the question that quantum mechanics isn't really able to resolve is reality subjective or objective? Can there be a one reality in which we all live in, or is reality constantly multiplying subjectively? Okay? In other words, whenever we make a decision, whenever we act, it changes reality for us, but not for others. Okay? Is it possible, like, we all live within our own universe that is unique to us? Okay? That's a question quantum mechanics cannot answer. And it creates a huge problem in quantum mechanics. But if we go back to Kant, well, the answer is obvious. It is true that we do create our own individual reality, right? The noumena is something we can never see. This is quantum mechanics. The mind, when it interfaces with the thing in itself, it creates the world that we live in. Okay? So this brings back to the point that the imagination is the animating force of the universe. When we use the imagination, we create our own reality that is distinct from other realities. Okay? So, does that make sense? Okay. So, okay. Another way of framing this is, what is happening here? Is Kant describing the world we live in, or did he create this reality that we live in? Okay, and so this, another saying this then is, rather than artificial intelligence, neuroscience, quantum mechanics, all confirming what Kant first argued, another way of saying this is, Kant gave them the intellectual capacity to come up with these theories by themselves. Okay, another way of saying this is this: philosophy creates the boundaries of the human imagination. And science, all science is doing is playing with these boundaries to confirm what is known within these boundaries. Okay? That's the radical statement that I want you to think about. Okay? Is science capable of coming up with new ideas by itself? And the argument I would make is no. Because you can have data, what matters is your interpretation of this data. And this interpretation of data comes from the Geist. Okay? The collective mind that philosophers like Kant and Hegel created. And this is problematic because we live in a world today that is undervaluing philosophy and arts and overvaluing STEM, engineering, technology. Okay? And so what my argument to you is, if that is the case, if we just spend all money on science, it's all going to be useless. Okay? Because in the Dante worldview, Dante talks to God, writes the Divine Comedy. The Divine Comedy then inspires Kant to write the Critique of Pure Reason, which inspires Hegel, and the two together will go inspire neuroscience, artificial intelligence, and quantum mechanics. Okay? So in other words, it is imagination that creates all reality, not just our individual reality. There are some of us who are geniuses, who are able to imagine a new reality in which we can now inhabit and participate in. Right? And evidence for this is, ever since the Germans, so Kant also conceptualized the United Nations, okay? Ever since Königsberg fell, ever since the Germans lost World War II, we have not made major advances in science. Okay, remember, the transistor is not a major advance. It's just technology. It's just taking the science and then expressing it in the world that we live in today, okay? So without culture, without the Geist, is it possible to contribute to advanced science, okay? And I think the answer is no. I think we're stuck where we are because we've abandoned culture, we've abandoned the Geist. So Immanuel Kant was a citizen of Königsberg. In fact, he was called the Königsberg clock. Why? Because he was so regimented. He made sure at a very specific time he would take a walk somewhere, okay? And so by observing where he was at a certain time, the residents of Königsberg would know what time it is. All right, so you can make the argument that Kant created Königsberg because Königsberg would, after Kant, become the intellectual scientific center of Europe. But Königsberg also created him, okay, which is very an idea which would be very familiar to Hegel. Right? So that is it for Kant.